Picture this. It's 1986, and a young director sits in a Hollywood executive's office, his hands trembling slightly as he pitches what would become one of the most beloved films of all time. The executive leans back in his leather chair, shakes his head, and delivers those soul-crushing words every filmmaker dreads. Nobody wants to see a movie about old people talking. That director was Rob Reiner, and the film they almost killed before it could breathe. The Princess Bride. What you're about to discover will fundamentally change how you see some of cinema's most treasured masterpieces. Because behind every legendary film that made us laugh, cry, or believe in magic again, there's an untold story of rejection, desperation, and dreams that almost died in boardrooms across Hollywood. Rob Reiner sits across from me in his cluttered office, sunlight streaming through Venetian blinds, casting shadows across movie posters that tell the story of an extraordinary career. His eyes light up with that familiar mischievous glint as he begins to unravel a tale that sounds too impossible to be true. "You have to understand," he says, leaning forward, "The Princess Bride was considered unmarketable, a fairy tale for adults with sword fighting and comedy and romance. The studios thought I'd lost my mind." But Reiner's journey to that moment began years earlier in the most unlikely of places. Growing up as the son of comedy legend Carl Reiner, young Rob was surrounded by the golden age of television comedy. Yet instead of feeling inspired, he felt suffocated. "Everyone expected me to be funny," he recalls, his voice carrying the weight of decades-old pressure. "But what if I wasn't? What if I was just Carl Reiner's kid who happened to be in the room when genius was happening?" That insecurity would drive him through years of acting, from small television roles to his breakthrough as Mike Stivic on All in the Family. But even as millions tuned in weekly to watch him spar with Archie Bunker, Reiner harbored a secret dream that seemed impossibly distant. He wanted to direct. Not just direct, he wanted to tell stories that mattered, stories that would outlive him. The transition wasn't smooth. His first film, This Is Spinal Tap, was born from pure desperation. "I had this idea about a fake rock documentary," he remembers, "but no studio would touch it. They didn't understand mockumentaries. Hell, the word didn't even exist yet." So Reiner did something that would become his trademark throughout his career. He found another way. Working with Christopher Guest, Michael McKean, and Harry Shearer, they created something entirely new. But even as they filmed, doubt crept in like fog rolling over the Hollywood hills. There were nights I'd lie awake thinking, what if this is just stupid? What if I'm destroying these guys' careers along with my own? The vulnerability in his voice is startling, a reminder that even legends battle the same demons we all do. When Spinal Tap became a cult phenomenon, Reiner thought his path was clear. He was wrong. The success, instead of opening doors, seemed to lock him into a box labeled comedy director. So when he walked into that meeting with William Goldman's script for The Princess Bride, he was already fighting an uphill battle. The executives couldn't categorize it, Reiner explains, his hands animated as he recreates that fateful pitch. Is it a children's movie? A romance? An action film? A comedy? In Hollywood, if you can't put something in a neat little box, you can't sell it. And if you can't sell it, you can't make it. What happened next was a masterclass in persistence that would make Wesley's climb up the cliffs of insanity look easy. Reiner spent months going from studio to studio, collecting rejections like a heartbroken teenager. One executive told me, "Rob, you're a smart guy. Why don't you do another rock and roll comedy?" That's what people expect from you. The pain of being reduced to a single success still lingers in his voice. But sometimes, magic happens when you least expect it. Norman Lear, the legendary producer who had given Reiner his start on All in the Family, saw something others missed. Norman called me into his office, Reiner recalls, his voice softening with gratitude. He said, "Kid, I don't understand this movie, but I understand you. And if you believe in it this much, maybe I should too." Even with backing, the challenges were far from over. Casting became a nightmare of almost misses that could have changed cinema history. We almost lost Carrie L. West to another film. Reiner reveals, "Can you imagine anyone else as Wesley? It's like trying to imagine someone else playing Luke Skywalker." The near miss sends chills down your spine when you realize how close we came to losing perfection. Meanwhile, Crosstown, a young comedy writer named Paul Feig, was having his own struggles with Hollywood's narrow vision. Feig joins our conversation via video call from his home office, surrounded by memorabilia from a career that almost never happened. His journey to directing began in the most unexpected place: failure. "I was a failed actor," Feig says with the self-deprecating humor that would later define his work. "I mean, catastrophically failed. I was getting rejected for commercials about toilet paper. Apparently, I wasn't even good enough to sell bathroom products." His laugh is infectious, but underneath, you can hear the echo of genuine pain. That failure drove Feig to reinvent himself as a writer and director. But Hollywood had other plans. "I kept pitching these stories about real women, flawed women, funny women," he explains. "And executives would look at me like I was speaking Martian. 'Women aren't funny,' they'd say. Audiences don't want to see women being gross or stupid or vulnerable." The breaking point came when Feig pitched what would eventually become Bridesmaids. Picture this scene: a room full of suited executives, all men, listening to a lanky guy from Michigan describe a story about female friendship, wedding anxiety, and yes, a now legendary food poisoning scene in a bridal shop. The silence in that room was deafening, Feig remembers. "I could practically hear their mental calculators trying to figure out how to politely say no." But Feig had learned something from years of rejection that would serve him well. Sometimes the best ideas are the ones that make people uncomfortable. "I realized that if everyone immediately understood and loved my idea, it probably wasn't very original," he says. "The stuff that changes culture, that really matters, it always makes someone nervous at first." The path to Bridesmaids was paved with small victories and crushing defeats. Feig's earlier work on Freaks and Geeks, now considered a masterpiece of television, was canceled after one season. "I thought I was done," he admits. "Here was this thing I poured my heart into, that critics loved, that had this incredible cast, and nobody watched it. I seriously considered leaving Hollywood." What kept him going was an unexpected phone call from Judd Apatow, who had also worked on Freaks and Geeks. "Judd said something that changed my perspective completely," Feig reveals. "Paul, maybe we're not making this for right now. Maybe we're making it for later." He was right. Sometimes you're just ahead of your time. That conversation planted a seed that would bloom years later when Kristen Wiig approached Feig with an idea for a comedy about the dark side of weddings. Kristen had this kernel of an idea, Feig explains, but studios kept trying to turn it into The Hangover with women. They wanted to make it about crazy bachelor party antics, but with Bridesmaids, they completely missed the point. The point, as Feig saw it, was something much deeper and more radical than Hollywood was ready for. "We wanted to show women as they really are," he says, his voice gaining intensity. "Not as perfect romantic comedy princesses or sexy action heroes, but as complicated, messy, funny, real human beings." That sounds simple now, but in 2010, it was revolutionary. Back to Reiner's story. As The Princess Bride finally moved into production, he faced a challenge that would test everything he'd learned about filmmaking. The movie industry in the 1980s was obsessed with high concepts and big budgets. Princess Bride was neither. It was, in Reiner's words, a little movie with a big heart. "Every day on set, I felt like I was walking a tightrope," Reiner remembers. "One wrong move, One scene that didn't work, and the studio would pull the plug. I'd seen it happen to other directors. Hollywood can be ruthless when they think you're wasting their money. The pressure was immense, but something magical was happening on set. The cast, led by Carrie Elwes, Robin Wright, and Mandy Patinkin, created a chemistry that transcended the script. "There's this moment when you're making a movie," Reiner says, his eyes distant with memory, "when you realize it's becoming something bigger than what you planned. The actors start surprising you. The dialogue starts feeling lived in, and suddenly you're not just making a movie, you're creating a world." But even as the film wrapped, doubt lingered. The first test screening was a disaster. Half the audience walked out. Reiner reveals, the memory still painful after all these years. "I sat in the back of that theater watching people leave, and I thought, this is it. My career is over. I've made an unmarketable fairy tale that nobody wants to see." What Reiner didn't know was that the walkouts weren't because the movie was bad. They were because it was unlike anything audiences had ever seen. "We showed it to people expecting a typical 1980s adventure movie," he explains. "Instead, they got something that was sincere and ironic at the same time. Something that celebrated fairy tale tropes while gently mocking them. It was cognitive dissonance on a massive scale." Similarly, Feig's Bridesmaids faced its own crisis of confidence. "We had this food poisoning scene," Feig says, referring to what would become one of the most talked about sequences in comedy history. The studio executives were terrified. "You can't show women doing that," they said. "It's not ladylike. It's not attractive. Audiences will hate it." But Feig understood something the executives didn't: authenticity resonates more powerfully than perfection. "Every woman who saw that scene recognized something real in it," he explains. Not the literal situation necessarily, but the feeling of being powerless, of everything going wrong at the worst possible moment, of trying to maintain dignity when your world is falling apart. That's universal. The battle over that scene became symbolic of a larger war. Feig was fighting the right to show women as complex, flawed real people rather than sanitized versions of femininity. "There's this myth in Hollywood that women have to be likable all the time," he says. "But likable isn't interesting. Relatable is interesting. Honest is interesting." For both directors, the moment of truth came with their film's releases. The Princess Bride opened quietly, without fanfare or massive marketing campaigns. "I remember walking into a theater on opening weekend," Reiner recalls, "and there were maybe 20 people scattered throughout this huge cinema. I thought, well, at least my mom will like it." But something unexpected happened. Word of mouth began to spread like wildfire. Audiences didn't just enjoy The Princess Bride, they cherished it. They quoted it. They showed it to their children. They made it part of their cultural DNA. It became this generational bridge, Reiner marvels. Parents who saw it in theaters were showing it to their kids, and those kids were growing up quoting Inigo Montoya. The film's legacy grew organically, without studio manipulation or marketing campaigns. "True classics aren't made by committees," Reiner observes. "They're made by people who believe in something so deeply that they're willing to risk everything for it, and sometimes, if you're very lucky, audiences believe in it too." Bridesmaids faced similar skepticism, but found its audience through sheer force of honesty. "Opening weekend was terrifying," Feig admits. Would women actually show up for a female-driven R-rated comedy? Would men stay away? Would anyone care? The answer came swiftly and decisively. Bridesmaids didn't just succeed, exploded. It proved that audiences were hungry for authentic stories about women's experiences. Suddenly, every studio wanted female-driven comedies. Feig laughs. "The same executives who'd told me women weren't funny were begging me to make more movies about women being funny." But success brought its own challenges. Hollywood loves to learn the wrong lessons, Feig observes. Instead of understanding that authenticity works, they thought the formula was women plus gross-out humor equals profit. They missed the heart of what made Bridesmaids work. The heart, as both directors learned, is what separates memorable films from forgettable ones. You can have all the marketing money in the world, Reiner reflects. But if there's no genuine emotion at the core of your story, it won't last. The Princess Bride worked because it was about love, not just romantic love, but love of friendship, love of adventure, love of storytelling itself. Similarly, Bridesmaids endured because it was about female friendship in all its messy, complicated glory. We showed women supporting each other and competing with each other, sometimes in the same scene, Feig explains. That complexity, that contradiction, that's what makes characters feel human. Both films almost died because they couldn't be easily categorized, but that's exactly what made them special. The best stories exist in the spaces between genres, Reiner suggests. They're not pure comedy or pure drama or pure anything. They're like life, complicated, contradictory, surprising. As our conversation winds down, both directors reflect on what their experiences taught them about the creative process and the industry they've spent their lives navigating. Hollywood is built on fear, Feig observes. Fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of taking risks. But the only way to create something truly special is to embrace that fear and do it anyway. Reiner nods in agreement. Every meaningful film I've made started with someone telling me it couldn't be done or wouldn't work. This is Spinal Tap was too weird. The Princess Bride was too romantic. A Few Good Men was too talky. Thank God I didn't listen. The lesson isn't just about filmmaking. It's about the courage to pursue your vision even when everyone around you thinks you're crazy. The things that make you different, that make your ideas seem impossible or unmarketable, Feig says. Those are exactly the things that make them worth pursuing. Looking back at their careers, both directors see a pattern they couldn't recognize at the time. Their biggest successes came not from following trends or meeting market expectations, but from trusting their instincts and telling stories that mattered to them personally. The Princess Bride succeeded because Reiner genuinely loved fairy tales and wanted to create one that adults could enjoy without embarrassment. Bridesmaids worked because Feig understood female friendship from years of being surrounded by strong, funny women. Authenticity is the most powerful force in storytelling, Reiner concludes. Audiences can smell insincerity from a mile away. But when they encounter something genuine, something that comes from a real place, they respond with their hearts. As I leave our interview, I'm struck by a profound realization. The films we love most, the ones that become part of our cultural fabric, that we quote and reference and share with the people we care about, almost all have origin stories like these. They're the projects that were too risky, too weird, too different for the system. They're the dreams that almost died in conference rooms, but survived because someone believed in them enough to keep fighting. The Princess Bride and Bridesmaids didn't just succeed despite being difficult to categorize. They succeeded because they were difficult to categorize. In a world of formulaic entertainment, authenticity stands out like a beacon. Both films remind us that the best stories aren't the ones that fit neatly into predetermined boxes, but the ones that create their own categories entirely. Perhaps that's the most important lesson from Rob Reiner and Paul Feig's journeys. In an industry built on predictability, true innovation comes from the courage to be unpredictable. Their most important films almost didn't get made because they dared to be different. And in the end, being different was exactly what made them unforgettable.